What's the best advice you've ever received as a founder?
My father, who's a serial entrepreneur himself and started businesses.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're thrilled to have Justin Kosmides on the program. He's the CEO and co-founder of Bloom, an innovative operations as a service platform, revolutionizing all kinds of manufacturing industries, actually. With a background spanning e-bike manufacturing, urban beekeeping, and high-impact finance, Justin brings a unique perspective on building sustainable and scalable solutions in hardware and mobility. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Excited to be here and really dug up the urban beekeeping
Yeah,
side of things. Got all
yeah.
things covered.
Yeah, that came up somewhere on your profile. So that's awesome.
I like it.
Funny story, we actually had a pool installed here. We live east of Sacramento, Northern California. And when we moved in from Silicon Valley, we had a pool installed, a saltwater pool. And we're like so excited to use the saltwater pool. But at the same time, my father-in-law who lives with us started keeping bees not too far away from the pool. And two hives or two boxes, I don't know what you call them. And these bees found their way, they love the saltwater pool. And it's not like salt water from the ocean. I think it's like 1/10 the parts per million is like 3,600 parts per million. And I guess seawater is like 45,000. So it's a fraction, but it's still like they love that salt water. And so we'd go sit in the hot tub and the bees would just be swarming. And we just, spent a bunch of money in this pool, first world problems. And so I told my father-in-law, I was like, look, you got to get rid of the bees. I'm sorry.
Well, it's funny. Water is one of the only things that you really need to keep, maintain a hive is access to water close by. So
There it
it's,
is.
it was my COVID hobby, even though my mom was a beekeeper. So I grew up around them, but my COVID hobby was to launch a global e-bike brand and get bees. So both relevant to what we'll be talking about today. But I felt like bees were maybe a little bit easier, a little bit simpler, a little more relaxing than having an e-bike company.
Yeah, maybe we'll call this Ignite Beekeeping. I usually title each episode like with the topic, Ignite Startups. That would be this. Ignite, VC if it's a VC guest. But yeah, Ignite Bees. Maybe you could walk us through your journey, from finance to founding Bloom, kind of like all that varied experience that got you into what you're doing now.
Yeah, sounds great. Been quite a journey. Find myself sitting here in Detroit, Michigan, really in the thick of global manufacturing and a lot of the manufacturing pieces of it. So how did I get from born and raised Baltimore, Maryland? I guess I must be a sucker for these types of cities, the Rust Belt / ex manufacturing cities. But born and raised Baltimore, Maryland, school and after school in Vermont. And then I ended up in consulting and investment banking for well over a decade, about 12 years in the thick of it, helping, some pretty fascinating clients through those years, everything from a lot of SoftBank deals. So Clutter, Cloud Kitchen, we worked some really interesting deals. Probably overstayed my welcome in the banking industry by a couple of years. Probably should have gotten off that train, but it's a hard train to get off of once you're on. And, it's great. You really puts you in the thick of things and managing clients and deals and raising capital and very useful base for wherever you go, but it was never enough, really looking for that the next challenge. And I happened to live across the street from the first real big e-bike store, which was the Van Moof store in Cobble Hill, and was fascinated by the brand. Saw Trevor Noah go in and get one of the first bikes.
Yeah.
I saw the trend in both on the commercial side, delivery workers more and more using e-bikes, but also in consumers and bike share programs and others growing. And so figured something was on. So was an early adopter and had e-bikes both in New York, but I was also living in LA a little bit, was car free in LA, zipping around on an e-bike and just loving how incredibly mobile and free e-bikes were. And so knew that small light EV was starting to catch on and had an opportunity pre-COVID to start investing in a Brazilian e-bike brand and take it from Brazil, where it was originally based, and then scale it up globally. But with that meant scaling production, scaling logistics, scaling operations, scaling all these pieces of it. That was primarily, both capital raising, but also those other pieces of globally scaling the company into North America. And, found myself more and more thinking that I was just going to own and have a nice, fun e-bike brand on the side, but really a lot of hardware. And the reason why it's hard is because it includes the supply chains, the manufacturers, the logistics, so many of these pieces of the puzzle. And I like to call it the back of house, in a restaurant analogy, so much of the back of house to make sure the front of house, just to sell the e-bike and to do that is relatively easy by that point. But to choose contract manufacturers, figure out logistics, all these pieces of it, especially during COVID,
Yeah.
especially during the upheaval in some of these pieces. That was quite an interesting challenge.
Interesting. So you're kind of leaning into scaling this e-bike brand in the US and, dealt with all these challenges throughout the supply chain. And then kind of what took you from there into kind of founding Bloom?
Yeah. Well, we had some successes, some failures, typical, hardware operates on those kind of valleys of death and those peaks and valleys, and you got to continue both capital, but, a lot of that syncs up with cash flow conversion and how efficiently you can turn around and sell your product that you build and how you shorten that. And so I was always looking at a number of mentors and advisors telling me, you got to shorten the cash flow conversion. You got to get more efficient. You got to be able to turn over, or else you're going to get stuck. And so I was always looking at that and started to put some of the pieces together that maybe you could start manufacturing closer to the end consumer. And in doing so, you don't have to hold as much final good inventory, so you can produce less. You can be a little bit more reactive to demand cycles, and you save on a lot of international shipping and a lot of other inefficiencies that have been built into supply chains by going to the lowest cost, hourly wage, which is RMB in China historically for a lot of electric mobility. But with it, there's a ton of other costs associated with it. And so I was always looking at it, and we decided to shift our manufacturing from China to Detroit, Michigan here and go to one of the only end-to-end contract manufacturers for bikes in the country left over. Most of it had shifted over to Taiwan and China in the past 25, 30 years, 30, 40 years, time's flying. And in doing so, we saw a huge amount of benefits, right? We could shorten how much inventory we would hold componentry here, except for frames. We'd make the frames and so we were able to shorten that, saw some benefits, and started putting the pieces together and recognized that there was actually something bigger here. And that was the first instance of Bloom really starting to come together here. And then, really it was that in conjunction with a lot of e-bike brands in my sector starting to fail. So Van Moof, Cake, and electric motorcycles. And why were they failing? Well, they were failing for exactly what I was starting to solve for in some of those pieces of it. And so recognize that, and I was also truthfully running into a lot of same issues myself, mostly due to volume and scale and inability to get to that next scale, and recognize that Bloom could create this platform that everyone in electric mobility at the time was our focus, but now we actually see a little bit bigger perspective, could benefit from having access to more domestic manufacturing, but also a lot of these things that shorten and create a lot more efficiency in supply chains. This platform and this marketplace was started quietly in stealth mode in summer of 2023, right around when Van Moof and others were failing. Cake was getting ready to fail, and we started putting the piece together. We officially launched in spring, going into summer of 2024 last year, and started scaling up as after that.
That's amazing. And so what was the, I'd love to get to Bloom and what it does, but real quickly, I wanted to pull the thread on moving on, like this onshoring trend. What do you think is happening with, kind of the zeitgeist of global politics and manufacturing and robotics and just this entire ecosystem where you're kind of hearing this term onshoring? These companies are bringing manufacturing back to the US. What do you think the tailwind is there for that?
It's interesting. I think we're at a crossroads here, like a multi-crossroad, everything coming to a head right here, of combination of a lot of this mid-size electric hardware that we're talking about. So electric bikes, EV chargers, even like smart appliances, smart, lawnmowers, smart, all these different pieces of it are getting larger, heavier, and more complicated than their predecessors were. Dumb lawnmower, dumb bicycle.
Just
that was very
simple mechanical things, kind of industrial, change for 50 years or even 75 years.
Right. And so it was really easy to commoditize that stuff, right? And so it didn't matter if you were producing in Iowa or in Shenzhen, right? And thus you then start changing over to more complicated bombs, more complicated devices.
What's a bomb? Just so for people listening, what is a bomb? Yeah.
Bomb is not anything. You can say it in public. It is bill of materials, which is the common vernacular on the pieces necessary to put something together. And so these bombs have gone significantly more complicated, and also really going into a lot of life cycle costs, right to repair, and a lot of these other things continue to become more and more important in the things that we build, right? Keeping them on the road is a lot more complicated than it once was, even 10 years ago, even 20 years ago. And so thus these, okay, we're going to make it in Southeast Asia, ship it, going to be all, it's going to be offline, all of, this, call it 3, 6, 12, 18-month production cycles, very long production cycles, become, very expensive, and the parts, and this. And so a lot of these factors lead to creating some benefit onshore. Well, you combine that and all of this incredible advancements and all of those things with COVID and the supply chain disruptions, and quite frankly, the upheaval from shipping industry from $2,000 containers to $20,000 containers, and you combine those two things with a sprinkle of tariffs, protectionist trade policy, I would say an overall demographic shift in Southeast Asia and a lot of the markets that once were the factory of the world have gone more expensive, right? The hourly wage in Shenzhen, the desire of a lot of younger, and I'm not just picking on China, I'm saying in a bigger picture of a lot of it is becoming more expensive, right? And then you throw in automation, and I think that recipe creates a combination where bringing things near shore, onshore, and reshoring all becomes more favorable in the equation when you look at all of these things. I also, as a ex-finance kind of person, can't not put on cost of capital, right? When you are the cash flow conversion of when you start building something to when you can first start selling it, when you have that, it's dead cost, and it's very expensive. And, for e-bikes and for a lot of these bigger, larger, heavier things, that's really expensive capital to tie up. And that's becoming more and more of an issue.
Yeah. So you got these tailwinds, and you experienced it firsthand, onshoring e-bike manufacturing directly. What was the aha moment where you're like, okay, maybe there's an opportunity here for Bloom? What is Bloom, and what are you guys aiming to accomplish?
Yeah. Well, the aha moment was really that in all of the things we just talked about and all those tailwinds, you also have the ability right now, that's really a lot of the pieces affecting, mostly the demand side of the equation, the brands and a lot of pieces of it. You also have the supply side, right? You have an incredible turnover of old manufacturing facilities, plants, operations here that's either changing over generationally or, quite frankly, in a prime position to kind of retool, invest in. So you combine, it's funny, we're going back and forth the day after inauguration, right? So we're going back and forth from, you've got the tariffs for 4 years and really stepping into it. Then the past 4 years has been a push to really invest in retooling and restructuring. We've got a long way to go. And so you've got these pushes and pulls of encouragement of nearshoring and reshoring and onshoring push. And so you've got the supply side also want to participate, right? You've got changeover in automotive. So you've got companies here in Detroit that, for the past 100 years have made the springs and transmissions. Well, surprise, EVs don't have transmissions, right? And EVs don't need those springs. And so that crazy family wealth that built that type of company, or that has worked on the dashboards for Ford F-150s, or has worked on displays, all is in a prime position to say, you know what, how do we invest? How do we participate in the next wave of this? Well, something like Bloom really starts pulling together these opportunities, because they don't know how to pick that electric motorcycle company or this EV charging company, and it's extremely risky, right, to retool into position. And they're used to low mix, high volume, right? They're going historically the past 100 plus years to now being asked to switch to high mix, low volume. It's very risky changeover. And what Bloom and Bloom's platform really behind the scenes, what it's really doing is it's aggregating more and more of these hardware brands and more of these opportunities for them to participate and to go medium mix, medium volume, because you're going to 3 electric motorcycle companies.
Interesting.
And so the aha
so you're kind of looking
was,
across the industry, and you're spotting. So the demand has gotten on the manufacturing side. This is a really interesting concept. Higher mixes of lower volume runs, which in manufacturing, like you always want to go with the lowest mix, highest volume, so you can be as efficient, right? Like a Model T manufacturing line, right? It's going to roll off, and everybody gets the exact same car, exact same color. And now you're seeing this demand shift towards, I want an e-bike, but I want all this customization of the e-bike, right? And you're getting these very limited runs where it's not 1 million units. It's like, we're going to do 3,000 of this version, 5,000
Right.
of that version. And what Bloom is doing is what I hear you saying is kind of looking across some of the commonalities across these manufacturers and
Yeah,
kind
on
of
this
connecting some of those dots.
Yeah, on the supply side, and that's a really important part of, creating a marketplace, right? We could all the demand side you want, but if you don't have the supply side and helping to pull these things together, then you're dead in the water. And so part of it is really helping to connect those pieces and connect those pieces of, quite frankly, for a lot of these companies, and it's not just on manufacturing, right? Our motto is, for Bloom, it's built by, delivered by, and then serviced by the Bloom network and Bloom. And so not only to build your product or assemble your product really is what we're focused on. And we go down the difference between full build manufacturing and just assemble. But
At a high
really,
level, you have like raw materials, you pull them out, you
right,
refine them, and then you take
right,
those refined materials and you make them into components, like
right.
bike frames. You said you're still getting those from China, and
Yeah,
then
you're
you
still,
ship all those components to a place like Detroit
yep,
or
yep,
Ohio somewhere. And
yep,
now all these pieces come in from hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers in an assembly line, right?
yep, exactly. And you're putting them together and the pieces together. And so assembled, but then you're also storing the replacement parts right there. You're warehousing and distributing from it, and you're creating a much more efficient system in that. But you're helping bring together four e-bike companies to one partner that it would be extremely costly for them to go find. And so it's very fragmented. I mean, that's the one, why we really started with electric mobility is the fragmentation on both sides of the marketplace, and really starting to pull those together. But we hope and really point to more and more. Okay, here I'm a manufacturer and I see more opportunity because I'm a member on the Bloom platform that I can get access to more opportunities on one production line. Right, that a production line can switch every 6 weeks or every 4 weeks, but I've got enough opportunities coming in from the Bloom network that are close enough, right? That's what part of our special sauce is, like
Yeah,
helping to align that matchmaking.
yeah, and it's an interesting marketplace problem, right? Because marketplaces are great when there are inefficiencies and there are fragmentations on the demand and supply side. So maybe you could talk a little bit about why Bloom, why now? Why do you need a marketplace model? What's to prevent these suppliers and builders from going around you, and just the marketplace leakage thing? And how do you keep people on the platform and keep them engaged and
Yeah,
using you, right? That's the
yeah.
big question that you usually have in a marketplace model.
It's something that will be ongoing. And we are working with our smallest customer is maybe a company of 3 people, and our largest customer is I'm not allowed to say their name, but you could probably guess. It's one of the top global car companies based in Asia. So of all sizes, right? And why are they coming to the Bloom platform? Why are they utilizing the Bloom platform, especially as we are continuing to build out and build more pieces of it? It really is in terms of access, in terms of efficiency and finding your partners. I call it partner, and that is everything from your contract manufacturer. Who are the 3 top contract manufacturers that I need to be in front of to build my vehicle near shore,
Yeah.
or
And
here
it's
in
not
the
just
U.S.?
like people forget, or a lot of people don't know, but like even an e-bike might have dozens of partners in that supply chain,
Yep,
if not
yep,
hundreds,
right.
right? And so like
And
if you're the e-bike manufacturer here, you're like, okay, who is the best at making the brakes or making kind of the types of metals that brakes need for this type of torque that e-bikes have? Right?
yeah,
Here are my specs in building this really complex machine, and who's best to do this?
right. And that's like, even I'm amazed by even these incredible hardware companies that we all know and love and see headlines and get excited about their products rely on a number, dozens, hundreds of behind the scenes support to help them build, help them put the pieces together, help them efficiently get it around and warehouse it and move it and efficiently get it to consumers. And this fallacy of vertical integration that everyone thinks that they're working towards, yeah, there are a lot of benefits in some of those things, but even Apple, even Tesla has, and works with large number of,
Really Apple. I mean, they
right,
outsource a lot of
right,
almost all their
a lot
manufacturing.
of those pieces of
Yeah.
it, and to find those and to put those pieces together and evaluate. I mean, that is desire to continue to help doing that. But why Bloom, and why do these companies go back to us more and more? Well, it's again creating that database and that network and building more and more of the best and the transparency in helping them discover, number one, the efficiency of bidding out and booking. So bidding and booking process of, okay, help me compare contract manufacturer A and contract manufacturer B. Or, again, and again, we talk about contract manufacturing, but where you choose to warehouse your goods or bring your goods in and store stuff or distribute, that's an important
who's your
evaluation
3PL
too.
and who's your
3PL,
freight forwarder and like all of this value chain.
And there are teams of people. And I know firsthand, I had people on my team that I hired to help make these decisions, costly decisions and I made just as many good calls as I did bad calls, and our teams did, and many other people do. And there's a lot of efficiency, even if you're the top bike company in the world or the top EV charging company. A lot of these things, is very, very costly and expensive to put all the pieces together. And then the last piece of it is invoicing and simplified billing. So for Bloom, for now, it's simplified billing down into one invoice on a monthly basis. You also, as a Bloom member, you pay your monthly membership fee to have access to this network as a hardware company. But we simplify it down to one invoice. Now, in the future, we're working towards more financing options, and I'll simplify that down. There's some pieces of we really want to offer. When you go over to China right now and you say, or many other areas of
Vietnam would be another big one.
Vietnam,
Africa,
Taiwan,
yep.
And you say, I want to build, a lamp, or I want to build something. You go to a trade rep, they help connect you, they help put those pieces together, help you negotiate your payment terms. One of the big pieces of manufacturing here, and also all these other pieces of managing, is there's a lot of inefficiencies with the financial aspect of it, right? And so what Bloom really locks people in is how we can simplify that financing down to one invoice, pay all the vendors, manage all that, but it's simplified down. And then the eventual goal and the pieces of it is to offer financing terms, both shorter term financing terms, but longer term financing terms. So similar to how Airbnb keeps people flowing back onto their platform, insurance, finance, and some of these other pieces. Why do I still use Airbnb instead of renting out my place? Well, it's guaranteed payments coming in from my side, and that and all those other pieces of it. A lot of those pieces we're pulling together. We just hired one of the first 100 at Airbnb that is helping us do that exact thing for our marketplace too.
Oh, what is Airbnb helping you with?
Oh, no, one of the first 100, we just hired one of the first 100 at Airbnb to join our team. So
nice.
We're excited about that.
Kind of a famous marketplace company.
It's known for creating a pretty efficient marketplace, success. Keeping people on their platform.
Yeah, that's great. And so what is this person going to help you do?
Operations and growth.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, because you got your supply and you got your demand, you got to balance this out. How do you keep them there?
Yeah. We also have, the other piece of it is there's so much learning that we're already gathering from about our 3 dozen customers that we have on our platform and growing. So much of this will also be the learnings from the data on more efficient this or more, I can do this, I can choose this, or I can do that. And so there's a lot of pieces that will come off of our platform. We anticipate that we can turn around and help our members become more efficient and keep them on the platform as well. So.
Yeah. Well, that's what's beautiful about a platform like yours, right? Is over time, you'll increasingly address gaps in the market, and you'll just get really good at making it like something they can't live without. Because, I mean, frankly, people could do this internally. They could, hire a procurement team, go through and spend a bunch of money.
Team.
Yeah, spend a bunch of money themselves and to do this. But what's beautiful about SaaS platforms and kind of SaaSy marketplace platforms like what you guys have is you can take a look at this undifferentiated work that's done across the industry and say like, oh, I'll just do that for you with this platform. And then you don't have to hire a bunch of people. We could just do it way more efficiently because we're doing it for the entire industry.
This episode of the Ignite podcast is brought to you by our friends at Build, spelled BYLDD. Build is a development agency that specializes in helping early stage startups, especially non-technical founders and teams, build and launch scalable revenue generating software products. Most startups don't have $100K to hand over to a big agency. And honestly, for your first product, you probably shouldn't. Sure, you could try rolling the dice on some freelancers, but that's a gamble with unclear costs and a lot of project management headaches and no guarantees. That's where Build comes in. For just $10K in about a month, Build can turn your validated idea into a real product that's ready to go to market. It's a smart, efficient way to build a foundation for a company of any size. And yes, companies that start with Build can and have scaled very large. Their clients have gone on to be backed by YC, Y Combinator, and Google, and raise funding at multi-million-dollar valuations. Ready to get started? Head over to build.com. Again, that's BYLDD to connect Ayush and the team and let him know you heard about Build on the Ignite podcast.
And we're already seeing with the members that are on the platform and joining the platform, how much more efficient they are kind of before and after, right? And what it looks like. And so, an e-bike brand, what is that, company's operations pre and post, bloom, a lot more efficient. And
I'd love
that's
to pull on that thread, the
Yeah.
efficiency.
Sure.
Can you share some examples, some numbers without naming names, obviously, but how you've successfully streamlined these operations and some of the success you've had?
I think that's got some great case studies, and we'll be putting out more and more as platform grows. Again, we're only barely into year 2 here. Moonbikes is a perfect example of it. Moonbikes is an electric snow bike, which is perfect for this Detroit, negative 3-degree weather outside.
Yeah, what's the
right
weather
now.
outside right now? -3?
It's extremely cold today. I think it
I'm
was
in
1
California
degree
in a
when
t-shirt and it's in the city.
Yeah, I think it was 1 degree when I walked in this morning.
Jeez.
Literally 1 degree, and that was before wind chill.
Oh, man.
No, it is. They're electric snow bike company. They make small, like, snowmobiles is the visual to imagine.
Kind of a niche manufacturer, right? What's the demand for that? That's not,
Right.
hey, let's go build a bunch of F-150s. No, they're selling tens of thousands of units a year, maybe.
They're selling. They've got about 1 to 2,000 customers on the road. They're picking up pace.
Yeah.
They sell for about $7,000-8,000 a piece. They're great. But, a nice toy to have for a lot of people, and growing demand. Their entire team's based in France. They barely have 1 employee in the U.S., and they use the Bloom platform to find contract manufacturer and assembly group, and then they warehouse and distribute from our group, and they do it all from some what looks like some beautiful French villa and overseas and
That's
in
amazing.
Paris, and it allows them to be much more efficient. Previous to that,
Wow.
they had 2 different warehouses. They were spending an exorbitant amount of money on rent and employees and whole systems. Now it can streamline down to literally logging onto their Bloom platform and being able to move things around and choose.
That's amazing.
And quite frankly, make choices on during the off season. Obviously, they're not selling it in July and August. They can shrink down to a much more efficient operation. It's great study in how you can take a lot of fixed costs in operating and running a brand and turn it into much more variable cost structure. And as
kind of like what AWS did with cloud, right?
Bingo.
You used to take a huge team of people raising tens of millions of dollars to get a website on, and along comes AWS and they're like, you know what? We got you. We'll just bill you per hour. We got this platform. You got S3 and EC2, and you can just kind of just take our building blocks and just build whatever. And that's kind of what I see you guys doing with manufacturing, is kind of saying, hey, we got you. We got off here. And then you can just kind of piece it together however it makes sense for you. And you can just run it. It's almost like this platform as a service marketplace for manufacturing and logistics and all the things that you would need to like build physical products.
And then you're, quite frankly, on that analogy, then you are really just helping to define the APIs and the rules of the road per se to operate, and you're being the transparent connector in a lot of those pieces of it, but you're turning it into a much more efficient way for these companies. To use that same analogy, software companies, about 10, 15, 20 years ago had to spin up their own servers, and it was completely normal to have a team dedicated to operating the hardware. And then along comes AWS and other cloud services, and you can shift that entirely to a variable cost structure. Well, you can think about operations and a lot of these pieces of it really shifting into the same thing for these hardware brands. That really is the entire goal, is how can we make hardware less hard, right?
Yeah.
How can we make it more efficient, that people look at it as like, okay, you're not spending, expensive capital on either CapEx directly or inefficient practices of recreating wheels or, spending weeks deciding on where you're going to warehouse. No, it's all
literally recreating wheels.
I like that. Exactly, right?
Yeah, literally you're recreating
wheels while you're creating wheels.
Yeah, exactly. That's literally what they're doing. It's like they're trying to manufacture wheels when somebody else out there is clearly way better than they will ever be at it. And so they might as well find who that is. And that's the magic of a platform marketplace business like you guys are building, which I loved when I met you guys.
Right place, right time for it. I mean, we couldn't be having these conversations, even a couple of years ago. It needed the disruption, needed the advancements on things, needed the demand side that we saw during COVID for a lot of these types of things and the growth, and then needed, quite frankly, priming the pump for building it closer in some of these other pieces. And look, plenty of our customers also continue to use their supply chain overseas because it's, it takes a long time to shift a production line or some of these other things, and use us for other operations. That's the point is, we can plug into what's most efficient in terms of how you restructure your ops and your supply chain.
Yeah, I love that. And so what are some of the biggest challenges in scaling a platform like this, and how are you guys overcoming? I know it's like you're only in year 2, but I'm sure you're starting to kind of, with a few dozen people relying on you now, companies relying on you, you're starting to kind of face some challenge.
It's funny. It's, this is the first time, we've got now a founding team of 5 and then a larger team closer to 10 people now as of last week. It's funny. There's no shortage of demand. Right? We do not have a demand issue.
Wow.
Every single, especially, I think we're uniquely positioned as I sit in the middle of New Lab and surrounded by robotics and mobility companies and other companies creating incredible technology, but also a lot of global auto companies trying to get into new form factors and a lot of changeover, right? There's no shortage when we go into those conversations of people saying, yes, I want a more efficient way to run my back of house, to the restaurant analogy. I want to focus on engineering my product. I want to focus on selling my product. I want to focus on the front of house. Please take this off my plate. It's way too inefficient. And so there's no shortage of demand. Where there's a shortage in the challenges that we face is on the supply side, right? So how do we help elevate and standardize and create those APIs as we discussed, and how we work with more and more service partners. And then, quite frankly, it's also
MPIs.
a time.
It's manufacturing programming interfaces.
I like that. I might have to steal
MPIs,
that.
There you go.
MPIs. I like that. MPIs. And then we need something for like warehousing and logistics. We'll think on that one. And then for us, quite frankly, it's a lot of these, there's so much fragmentation, a lot of it from a product standpoint, right? We do have an online portal that people log into and connect to. There's a lot of variation in that. And so it's starting to pull together and speaking the same language, and code and how does this warehouse management system talk to this ERP system, talk to this thing? That is a challenge, but that's a challenge that, quite frankly, there's been so much development and advancement. I think that is, quite frankly, just a time for us to play catch up to. And so, we're in a prime position, focused entirely, back to the is building up more of the supply side of this marketplace. We spent so much time and energy on the demand side. And that's a very important lesson that I've learned in scaling. You can't scale one too much more than the other. So we're building up on that side.
Yeah. And how do you, you clearly have a passion for scalable, sustainable ecosystems. How does Bloom contribute to kind of broader sustainability in kind of this hardware and manufacturing industry?
Yeah, the interesting thing that we left off that first question, that first list, when we were going through, the transportation, the global transportation and cash flow conversion, all these other things that you factor into. The other thing that this really looks at is, quite frankly, is like, does it make sense for us to produce these incredible electric vehicles and such a dramatic impact and more usage in cities and, more and more people using electric bikes and electric, mobility and EV chargers and all these other things halfway around the world and then shipping it. And mostly when you look at how you're shipping it, you're shipping a lot of air because it's large, heavy, awkward. And in producing and assembling them closer to home, you can flat pack, you can be much more efficient in the componentry. Are we going to ever be producing, some of these fine, cheap componentry here? Probably not. That's probably lower in the value chain. But as you start assembling more here, then people look to what's the next step? Okay, well, now we do batteries. Now we do motors. Now we do like the higher value stuff and working our way down. But really the first domino to fall needs to be assembly. And there's a huge sustainability impact on producing these things closer home and reducing the waste, not only in manufacturing, but also in the global transportation of a lot of these things. You also then, with that transparency and obviously standards being higher, have the ability to look at more, electric power, sustainable power going into these factories. Does it make sense that we're building some of our best electric bikes in factories powered by coal-fired power plants? No, it probably isn't the best. But, we can be, making some of the better choices from a global sustainable choices.
Well, you think about like what the inputs are to making things. It's kind of basically human labor, human ideas, and energy. and or machine labor, and with robotics coming down, right? Like maybe you could talk about how you see robotics kind of creating a tailwind is what I see for what you guys do, and onshoring and manufacturing things closer to home. And
Yeah. And also just standardizing a lot of those pieces of that, right? When you're designing for manufacturing, you're designing for robotic assembly or manufacturing with robotics in mind, you can make a lot more of those types of decisions in terms of really pushing for some choices in how you manufacture. And we're obviously at the precipice of seeing a lot of that. You can see a production line of Tesla and some of those see that, and that's going to start really trickling down to more and more, we'll call it more, common items, even though a $7,000-8,000 snow bike isn't the best example, but it's starting to, really be, more and more efficient where you can start bringing in robotics into that. And again, that's tooling up and becoming more efficient as a country to assemble and really starting to close the gap. There's a lot of great examples of people that are going after that type of technology. So again, right place, right time for us to be doing some of that, where it's not necessarily where, a one-to-one, labor input, to your point there, China versus US. It's, there's a lot more other factors that factor in when you're comparing, do I produce in South Carolina or do I produce in China?
And where do you kind of see Bloom in the next 5 to 10 years? How do you envision it evolving?
Yeah, I mean, the dream is to make hardware less hard by simplifying the back of house and really creating a lot more efficiency in a lot of those pieces of it, and really being the go-to for how you operate your hardware business, big, small, medium, all, everything in between, being that go-to plugging in between your ERP system and a lot of your other tools, and finding, discovering, and really flowing through. And so I see Bloom being central to the advancements and the changeover of a lot of this incredible technology that we're surrounded by and innovate. This country innovates so well. And historically, we've just then packed it up and shipped it off to, some manufacturing line halfway around the world. And if we can close that gap and we can shorten that, I think of the incredible, the first dirt bike, American dirt bike, right? Americans love dirt bikes, right? I mean, I grew up on it.
I still ride dirt bikes. Let's talk about dirt bikes.
Right?
I love this.
Dirt bikes. You ready for this? There's been no true American dirt bike scale. Everything, Yamaha, Honda, so many others.
Yeah, they're all manufactured overseas. KTM.
All manufactured, right? Austria, so many are BMW, all these like overseas, but both Europe and that. But we've got an incredible amount of riders. God knows how many millions of riders are out there. And so this company called Dust out of Oregon, these guys are ex Ubco, which is a New Zealand mobility company that moved on, have built the best dirt bike, all American dirt bike. It's electric too, which is on the
so
side.
Like kind of competes with the Stark Varg or
exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
But it shortens the window between engineering and production, right? And because they can make those changes and adjustments and learn from, shorten that window and that education of it, and then you're not even getting into like usage and real usage that then feeds into it, right? You don't get these situations where like, Surron wasn't designed by, anyone in the United States. It was designed in China. Right. There's a lot of reasons and thousands of other not Surrons that didn't, do nearly as well. And so you really shorten that window between innovation and manufacturing and user. And so when you can complete that and you can complete it more, quite frankly, more efficient, then, that really unlocks a lot of incredible innovation and a lot of incredible growth. And I think Bloom will really help facilitate more of that. And for me, the dream is to watch that and to watch people go into and invest in and support hardware companies without this connotation of, no, I don't invest in hardware companies. It's too inefficient. It's too, I don't touch that stuff. I don't, I don't want to be exposed to that type of stuff. But when you reduce all of these like heavy weights that Bloom, offloads from companies onto a much more variable cost structure, well, I hope that, and my desire is, more money is going into hardware companies that are really going after this type of innovation, this type of growth, because that's what, quite frankly, we do best, and to really speed that up. So
that's fascinating. And I think you might see that. I think you look at the history of venture capital startups and the way that cloud and mobile enabled, creating SaaS companies at scale for, an order of magnitude less cost. I think you could look at platforms like yours, like Bloom, robotics and et cetera, reducing hardware expenditures by an order of magnitude and SaaSifying it a bit where it is much more scalable, right? When we have robots that can like spin up manufacturing, and then you have platforms like yours that can orchestrate all of that, then maybe hardware becomes a lot more investable, from a venture capital perspective, right? Because I invest in software because it's 90% on the margin. I invest in marketplaces because it creates enormous value. You kind of basically extract a value from the ecosystem. But I don't invest in hardware, right? In fact, I have a couple hardware shutdowns at this point in my portfolio. They're just really hard to get right.
And I think if you went back and looked at it and where they went wrong and what they got hung up on, speaking from experience, cash flow and costs that they shouldn't have been, you don't invest in a software company to then go spin up their own server rack, somewhere.
It's undifferentiated.
It's right.
We're going to go compete with Azure or AWS on all this infrastructure. No, you shouldn't do that.
Right. No, that's a really bad use of your capital. And so I fundamentally believe that will we ever close the gap entirely? No, hardware will still have some of that. And in a way, it's good. You want some barriers right there, right, in that piece, but you want to reduce that as much as possible because that can really create some incredible innovation, growth. And so I see that going in that direction, how we can really support that. And then I also fundamentally, quite frankly, believe heavily that, and this isn't a tariff thing or, it needs to be made in the US, but I fundamentally believe that the more that we can build here and the more of a we're having a manufacturing revolution as a country. This is politics aside.
Renaissance.
Right? It's coming back, right? The reindustrialization of it. And robotics and automation, a lot of these pieces have a lot to do with it. Quite frankly, more than any trade policy and any tariff. Although we'll see what happens over the next couple of years.
Well, economics just drives so much of it behavior, right? When China now, the wages have risen. The reason we went over there, 30, 40 years ago is wages were just a fraction of the cost. And so it made sense to go set up. And to your point, the manufacturing runs were a lot less complex and products were a lot more homogenous. And now you just have this high mix, low volume world that we live in. And then you layer on robotics, you layer on, cheaper energy, which China is beating us at right now, but I'm sure we'll get our act together soon with various kind of micro nuclear facilities that are coming online and stuff like that. You layer all this in and it just makes sense to, eventually maybe we all have little bloom boxes sitting in our backyard manufacturing stuff for us.
crazy idea. But
well, why don't we wrap up with a rapid fire?
Love a good rapid fire.
Yeah. This is where actually the best conversation happens, believe it or not, is in the rapid fire. What's the most innovative electric mobility or manufacturing trend you're excited about right now?
Standardization. Right? The more standardizing you do, the more you can plug and play, the more pieces. This is batteries, this is motors, this is a lot of other pieces. So standardization, I think we're in the early waves of a lot of this.
Right. So like if a battery works in e-bike A, it should work in e-bike B and so on. It's like standard sizes, configurations. Detroit.
Charging standards, USB-C, everything. We see this, right? It just becomes, why do I need to carry around 5 cables? Why do we need 6 battery packs? Why, modularity, a lot of these pieces of it, but it really gets down to standardization.
So Detroit is the hub for Bloom. What's your favorite part of working there besides the weather?
I love Detroit. I've fallen in love, and it is it's an incredible city. I highly encourage anyone who was just named New York Times 52 places to visit in 2025. It is an incredible place. It's an incredible place full of people who are building. Art, music, food, businesses, hardware, people who are actually building stuff, right? Factories down the road. One of our partners is that built tanks during World War II and is now getting ready to build, EV charging cabinets and all sorts of these, incredible, like, people are building here. You don't get that in, no offense to my former city of New York or San Francisco or other things. They're software and other things. And that creates some really fascinating people. And, it's the birthplace of techno, so there's a great music scene here, too.
Oh, that's cool. What's your favorite lesson from scaling Vela bikes?
Man, Vela was fascinating because it was multicultural, right? I was working with Brazilian engineers, Brazilian designers, American operations and logistics people, and then Chinese manufacturers. Wow. So dealing with the multitude of cultures and translations and this and work styles and all different pieces of it. But that's normal. That's common for hardware companies and other pieces of it. There's what I found some incredible designers, industrial designers and engineers in Brazil. And so, incredible people to like, here's, blank canvas, like design and build something, right? But they're not the best at building stuff. And the Chinese are like so good, so detail oriented. And then it's like the Americans are so good at like just getting shit done. And so, dealing with those pieces of it, incredible lessons came off of that. Really hard, but some incredible lessons came off.
Interesting how culture informs competitive differentiation is what it sounds like. You know,
globalization too. On
right.
That piece. Yeah.
What's a book or resource every founder should read?
James Dyson's book, Against the Odds, hands down.
And what's why is that book a must read?
And what he stuck through, and his family and the people around him. I mean, it took him 10 years. Love his line. Everyone was like, oh, why did you keep 90 whatever % of your company? It's so incredible that, we're able to retain so much ownership. And he was like, has some line where he's like, I didn't want this. I was trying to raise money. I was trying to, have investors, but it took him 10 years to really see that realization of a lot of the pieces that he was putting together. And man, talk about like sticking with it. That is, really, and he had an incredible wife, incredible family supporting him through that. But couldn't imagine 10 years of failure.
Yeah, try being a VC. That's basically it. You sign yourself up for failing just constantly. What's the most surprising insight you've learned from beekeeping?
What's the most? That urban bees, so bees in cities, have actually better survival rates than bees in like rural places, and they're longer, like they're stronger hives and colonies.
Interesting.
And there's a lot of research around this. Like no one's, to the best of my knowledge, no one's really landed on this, but a lot of people point to like there's a lot less spraying and chemicals in cities, right? People aren't spraying less
birds eating them and stuff.
Fields. Yeah, and so
less
it's
predators.
It's actually kind of contrary to popular belief. Actually, urban bee hives are pretry strong.
Oh, interesting. Bees will inherit the earth.
They party all night long.
Yeah. What's another company you admire besides Bloom?
There's a lot. I mean, I'll just say all the founders, as I literally look out to some of the founders who are here late night at New Lab, and the founders that just stick with it. And so, I always, I know what that pain is. I know what that feeling is. And so, to those founders who have landed on some piece of incredible advancement, some new type of motor, new type of this, and are just sticking with it. It's really, those guys are the ones that are, I continue to admire, stick with it. So,
what's the best advice you've ever received as a founder?
I'll go, my advice, my father, who's a serial entrepreneur himself and started businesses, some successful, some very not successful, and learn the ups and the downs. He would always tell the story of the Portuguese and the Greeks and the fishermen. And the story goes, you got the fishermen, in Portuguese were always known for being really good fishermen, right? Going out and catching the best fish, but they needed ice. And so then there was someone who drove the ice to the ports. And so he was telling these different roles going up there, and he would be like, and then the Greeks, and obviously he's biased because I'm Greek and we're Greek. And the Greek own the ice makers. He's like, get up to the ice makers, like be the ice maker. And, I think that's an important part of when you look at opportunities, where's the value chain in different pieces of it. It's interesting because I'm, obviously building a marketplace here, and we're an in-between thing. So we might be the better at like delivering the ice in some of these things, or then some might say we're the ice maker because we're, connecting and pulling opportunities together.
Yeah. You're running the marketplace where all of them to make the exchange, basically.
Right, exactly. There's one above the ice maker that's running the marketplace.
Yeah, you're running the platform. Platform businesses are the best if you can get them right. What's one global supply chain problem that you would solve instantly if you could?
Shortening cash flow conversions, creating that more efficient, right? The more efficient, ability to turn that over, negotiating better payment terms, having more local manufacturing, not having to rely on these things. The more you can do that, the more you can turn over your capital more efficiently.
Well, where can folks interested in learning more about Bloom and getting in touch with you? How can they do that?
I'm leaning into, I feel like the trend is really going on more and more towards LinkedIn. We're leaning into more of that. We're also going to start.
It does feel like LinkedIn is definitely has its heyday right now, especially with the whole people kind of fleeing Twitter and blah, blah, blah. I mean, people are still on X, I guess, but I've never got an audience on X for whatever reason. My audience is definitely LinkedIn because I'm more of a business guy, I guess. But yeah.
more positivity, more like,
Yeah.
congratulations on this. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of
Self-promotion.
we're definitely
Look at
pushing.
me and what I did.
Right. Look at what we're doing. A lot of, maybe a little too much, but we can
Yeah, it's fine.
tone
It's
it down
fine.
a little bit. But that, and then we're gonna launch. My co-founder Chris Nolte has an incredible YouTube series from his prior business, Propel, which he still does e-bike reviews and goes to factories. Has a lot of really amazing, interesting content on there, and we're actually, I guess it's the first time we're announcing, we're getting ready to launch our own YouTube side of things that dives into manufacturing and efficiency and all of that.
Gotta have
And
content.
maybe it will be a podcast. Like, there needs to be one more podcast in the world.
Yeah,
but,
you call it the Bloom Podcast, and you just interview all the people on your platform, right? All the manufacturers, all the
show what
builders.
they're doing.
Yeah, that's cool.
We'll see. Maybe it'll be
Maybe
good.
I'll watch that.
There's a lot of stories to tell these brands. Back to the dust. The American dirt bike. Like, there's some incredible stories of like, oh, there really is no American dirt bike.
That's amazing.
And so
I'm in the market for a dirt bike, so this is really interesting because I rode my friend's Husky, which is KTM basically, Husqvarna, a 302 stroke, and I've been wanting to get the Stark Varg, but I'm more of an enduro rider, so I do like single track stuff. So maybe I need to check out Dust.
You might want to check out Colin and Dust. A beautiful product, good size, right in between like a 125 and a 250. Good weight. Good.
That's the problem with the Stark is it's really heavy, and I'm not a motocross rider, so I don't want a 265-pound bike.
No.
That's what's great about the 302 strokes is that they're 230-pound bikes, wet.
Yeah.
And they're just really light and nimble. So if Dust is making something like that, there's a YC conversion. You can get a YC 250 conversion from somebody. I forget who. And that's a nice, light, kind of nimble bike. So I'd rather get an electric. I like the two-stroke. But there's nothing like electric. Once you go electric, you just can't go back to anything
quiet,
else.
Zipping through the woods. It's powerful. It's the torque, everything. I'm a big fan of what he's building, and they're going into production in a little over a month. So.
Okay, I'll check them out. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, check them out on the Bloom platform.
On the Bloom platform, yeah. Well, now the next step up is retail,
right?
Helping them create storefronts and all that stuff. But yeah,
ooh, then you're really gonna Shopify them all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Justin, thanks so much for coming on. Really enjoyed it.
Brian, really appreciate it. It's great chatting.
Likewise.